But other than that, looking pretty good. We do want to mention again also we have breaking news that we'll be following throughout the day. Again, the signatures that the Registrar of Voters in Orleans Parish was in possession of have been turned over to the governor's office. We're understanding the governor's people will look them over, kind of certify them, if you will, and then we don't have a number right now. They're in need of close to 50,000 signatures in order to recall the mayor. The governor's office did say that they would have a number later. We don't know what it is.
Right, and there's also, the question about what will happen with what the Secretary of State decided. That would mean that 25,000 voters would be discluded from this count in the rolls, meaning that about 5,000 fewer signatures would be needed for this potential recall. Again, this is signatures, so this isn't necessarily a ballot. Collected by people. In some cases, these signatures, the petition was sent out directly to homes with names pre-filled out on it. And so that may or may not make it easier to count. It's unclear what the governor's office will do with that count, verifying.
I guess they have the legal responsibility of deciding that, okay, this is legitimate, there are X number of signatures if they hit this threshold. And then there is some discretion that the governor has in this regard. He would, if they determine at the governor's office, obviously the governor's attorneys would be involved in this. Okay, these are legitimate, and they may be short, by the way, but let's just say theoretically that the question is settled and that they met the threshold. Then what happens is the governor decides when the election would happen, and he has some discretion to do that. Now, you mentioned possible lawsuits. That could drag this process out, and it could make it a moot point. There are a couple of different dates on the calendar that the governor could choose, including possibly the race for the governorship, the race to replace him when the turnout is higher, and that could have a big effect on how this all plays out. Generally, in elections, somebody who's highly motivated is going to turn out in a low turnout election. So we're kind of getting ahead of the thing now.
Right.
But there will be all kinds of strategy and discussion that takes place about when they even have this election, if in fact one ever happens.
Right. The governor could decide to have a special election if this does go through, but then that you have to consider the cost of an election like that.
Or the next regular election.
Right. Or if you do
other elections
the next regular election, then that would minimize the cost.
Which would be the likely choice, and then it would be a question of would it be the primary? If it were somehow dragged on long enough, it could be the runoff for governor, which would also be a high turnout election. So there are just so many questions, beginning with the key question of the morning, which will simply be, did they meet the threshold to trigger it? And there's been some speculation that perhaps they did not. So we'll see.
And Okay, right now we have Dr. Robert Collins joining us now to talk about, give us some insight into what's happened here. Dr. Collins, can you hear us?
All right, Dr. Robert Collins, are you there? As we try to establish, we'll let our technical people see if they can establish contact with them. And again, if you're just tuning in, as a lot of people do at the top of an hour, the Registrar of Voters has turned over to Governor Edwards' office the signatures that they collected in New Orleans in the recall effort, the effort to recall Mayor LaToya Cantrell. That has now gone to possession of the governor's office. What they will do is take a look at the signatures, decide whether...
It's Live with Kelly and Ryan. Today, actor, director, writer, and producer, Zach Braff. Plus, General Hospital superstar, Finola Hughes. And a special performance from the new Menudo. All next on Live. And now, here are...
Could be, but we just don't know.
It could be any time. And, that's definitely a question for Dr. Collins when we get him on the line, is what that review entails. I mean, if the Registrar of Voters here in Orleans Parish needed, at least 20 days to go through those thousands and thousands of boxes of signatures you're seeing here as they were unloaded the day that they were turned in, you got to imagine that the governor's office isn't going through every count line by line.
No, that's kind of the registrar's job. But there would be some sort of process that would take place where they would verify them. And you talk about laborious, because what happens is, someone will, all kinds of crazy things happen during a recall. If you collected 100 recall petitions, a certain percentage of them would be invalid. Either somebody has moved out of the city, doesn't
Right.
live here anymore, somebody from Metairie tries to recall the governor or the mayor. And then the other thing happens is there'd be multiple efforts. Addresses can't be verified.
Right.
Somebody signed the thing twice to make sure in their own mind that they got their name
that
on
it was
there, but that's
counted.
got to be discovered. So there's a whole laborious process that has had the registrar's people, together with some help from outside Orleans Parish,
Right.
working overtime, trying to get this verified.
And what's interesting is you may consider the fact that there may be voters out there, like you say, who aren't voters in Orleans Parish, who might work here or might come here. And in the initial days of the recall effort, they were holding these large gatherings outside of bars and at parks to try and encourage people to come in and sign. So you wonder, did someone sign who maybe wasn't a voter here in the parish? But like I said, the recall effort, about halfway through, spent a lot of money sending out these petitions that had the registered voters at those addresses' names written out on that petition to try and make it to where that would kind of keep any sort of handwriting illegibility errors. But that if that is the case, then that could make it potentially easier. This is an effort that was incredibly well funded and spent a lot of time pouring through the rolls, paying tens of thousands of dollars to a company to go through as a consultant to go through the rolls. And that's where they came up with this number that there were about 30,000 people who were on the rolls here in Orleans Parish before the recall effort began, who they claim aren't eligible to be voters because they either don't live here or they have passed away.
Died.
So I mean, and that's where a lot of this comes up, where with the Registrar of Voters and the lawsuit against the Secretary of State and the Registrar of Voters trying to bring that total tally down, that threshold that they would need to then trigger the recall election. If that happens, then a recall election would then occur.
And that's what we're waiting on. And we could hear that perhaps even as early as today, if they did meet the threshold. And again, there was some suggestion that they might not have met the threshold. The question then would be, would the governor say, okay, we'll have an election on this date, or would there be, there are going to be lawsuits over this thing, one way or the other, probably depending upon how far off they are above it or missing it. We understand that we do have Dr. Robert Collins from Dillard University, political analyst, on the line with us now. Dr. Collins, good morning to you. What's your reaction here to this news? We have a gremlin in our system, I think, this morning. Dr. Collins, are you there? And okay, apparently not. So we'll just give it another shot here. So we'll recap this and hear, I'm sure, from Dr. Collins later today. The news of the hour is that the governor is now in possession of the signatures that the Registrar of Voters in Orleans has handed over, the signatures collected in the effort to recall the mayor. We want to caution that we do not have a number yet. They declined to give us one. The governor's office does say that they will have a number later. We don't know if that means later today, but we'll have updates on the Fox 8 news throughout the day, including hopefully at noon.
Right, at noon we'll have the latest updates, and if you want the very latest, download that Fox 8 News app, because that will have the information as soon as we get it.
All right, in the meantime, thanks for waking up to the Fox 8 Morning Edition. Our next news at noon.
Until then.